So, if you're trying to figure out what on earth is happening with the silver market in 2026, you've probably noticed that the old rules just don't seem to apply anymore. Today, we're going to unpack a whole new way of looking at it, a framework that helps cut through all the noise and shows you what's really going on.
We're all taught in school that markets are simple. It's just supply and demand, right? Well, when it comes to silver, our source material suggests that's not just an incomplete picture, it's a dangerously misleading one. It's a starting point for sure, but it is not the main event. And that brings us to a pretty bold, pretty provocative claim from our source that you should probably just ignore the news and so-called expert analysis on metals. The argument here is that these narratives aren't just noise. They're often designed to build a story that can completely detach from physical reality. Okay, so if we can't trust the old models and we can't trust the news, what's left? Well, instead of looking at silver as a simple commodity, we need to completely reframe it. We need to see it as a fundamental conflict, a battle between two incredibly powerful opposing forces.
This right here is the central idea. Forget about a nice, neat balancing act. Think of this as a war. On one side, you have what the source calls minority rule, a small but powerful group that can shape the market's story with financial tools and media narratives. And on the other side, you have the hard, cold, unchangeable facts of physics and industrial demand.
So let's really break down the two sides in this war. On one hand, you have the world of paper contracts, of financial narratives. And on the other, you have the world of actual physical atoms that you can hold in your hand.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. Paper silver, things like futures contracts, media headlines, it can be created out of thin air. It's a story. But physical silver, that's bound by the laws of science. You literally cannot print more atoms to build the solar panels and electric vehicles that the world is demanding. So the crucial question is, when they're pulling in opposite directions, which one snaps first?
So how do we know when that paper story is starting to crack under the pressure of reality? Well, you watch the signals. You keep an eye on the paper short contracts to see if the bet against silver is getting way too crowded. And most importantly, you watch the physical inventory in places like the COMEX vaults, because when the shelves start to get bare, the story doesn't matter anymore. Reality is about to bite. Now, in the middle of all this chaos and noise, our source offers up a kind of secret weapon, a surprisingly clear indicator that can help us see where industrial reality is actually heading, often long before the silver market itself catches on.
Let's meet Dr. Copper. It's a great nickname, right? It comes from the idea that copper has a PhD in economics. Its price is seen as this pure, unfiltered signal of global industrial health. Why? Because it's almost all industrial use. It doesn't have what our source calls silver's monetary fuzziness, all that investment and speculation. Dr. Copper tells a much clearer, more honest story.
And here's the core relationship. Think of it like this. Dr. Copper moves first, driven by pure, real-world industrial demand. Then you have Ms. Silver. She follows Dr. Copper's lead, but because she's also seen as a form of money, her moves get dramatically amplified. She takes Copper's signal and just cranks the volume all the way up.
And you can see this amplifier effect so clearly right here in the data from the 2024-2025 industrial boom. Dr. Copper surged a very respectable 43% based on real-world demand, but Ms. Silver, following that exact same cue, went parabolic, skyrocketing 146%. That massive gap between the two, that's the monetary factor in action. It's investment demand pouring in and supercharging the underlying industrial trend. But hold on, there's a catch. This war against physical reality, it's not a one-way street. When prices get this high for this long, science starts to fight back. Industries don't just sit there and accept ridiculously high costs. They innovate their way around them. And here's why that matters so much. A massive chunk of silver's industrial demand comes from just a few key places. Solar panels alone account for 30%, and if you add in EVs and electronics, you're looking at 45% of all industrial demand. So if scientists can find a way to use less silver in just those sectors, it's an absolute game changer. And this isn't some far-off theory. It is happening right now. In the solar industry, you have companies pioneering copper plating to slash silver use. In the EV world, they're hard at work testing things like copper-aluminum hybrids. This whole process is called thrifting, and it's industry's #1 weapon to fight back against sky-high prices. But, and this is a really big but, this kind of substitution isn't like flipping a switch. Industry experts estimate it's a 3 to 5 year journey for these new technologies to be widely adopted. And that creates this incredibly critical window of tension where demand is screaming hot, but the viable substitutes aren't yet available at scale. Okay, so we've got the war, we've got the lead indicator, and we've got the scientific counterattack. Let's try and distill all of this down into a simple, practical toolkit that you can actually use to navigate the silver market as we speak. This table really cuts through the noise and focuses on the signals that actually matter. Right now, physical inventory is near decade lows, which suggests that the paper side is getting squeezed. The gold-to-silver ratio is compressing, which is a classic sign that silver is outperforming gold. And on the industrial side, demand is what economists call inelastic, which is just a fancy way of saying companies have to get the physical metal, making its availability even more important than its price. So what's the strategy? First, focus on the gold-to-silver ratio, not just the day-to-day dollar price. Second, learn to spot what's called narrative divergence. That's when the media headlines are telling you one story, but the hard data from the vaults is telling you a completely different one. Third, keep an eye on those industry thrifting reports to see how that substitution science is progressing. And finally, protect your own sanity by focusing on these big picture forces, not the daily market chatter.
And really, that's the ultimate question for the next few years. We are watching a fascinating, epic battle play out in real time. On one side, you have the infinite world of financial narratives and paper contracts. And on the other, the finite, unyielding demand for physical atoms, dictated by the laws of science. Physics or finance? Which one is going to bend first? That's the story to watch.